I've moved to a very valuable time spot, 11:35 on ABC. So instead of starting at midnight, my guest Jimmy Kimmel now starts at the same time as Jay Leno and David Letterman. As we'll discuss later, Letterman is one of Kimmel's idols, and Kimmel paid tribute to him when he received a Kennedy Center honor last month. Kimmel got his start in radio, then moved to TV and became nationally known for his work on Comedy Central as a host of The Game Show, Win Ben Stein's Money, and The Man Show. He started hosting Jimmy Kimmel Live in 2003. Comedy bits from the show, which often feature members of Kimmel's family or celebrity guests, often go viral. Last year, Kimmel hosted both the White House Correspondents' Dinner and the Emmy Awards. Jimmy Kimmel, welcome to Fresh Air. Congratulations on your new time spot, and we've been wanting to have you on the show a really long time, so I'm glad that you are here. Thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be here, Terry. I appreciate it.
Great. So, what's the symbolic value for you of being at 11:30 compared to 12:30, and what does that mean to you?
I like that you put it that way because I think the symbolism is probably more important because of Johnny Carson and because of the Tonight Show being on at 11:30, and so it's a big deal for me. It is. I mean, it's something that as a kid I was very interested in, and it's like being a baseball fan all your life and getting to be an announcer.
Part of it seems crazy to me that it's Leno, Letterman, you, and Colbert all at the same time. It's like, do you know what I mean?
It's too much. I know, it really is. But I don't, especially with Steven's show, I think that a lot of people will watch that show when they choose to watch the show. I think with the network shows, it's done more traditionally. It's people, maybe even couples sitting there, or families watching television at the end of the day, and it's kind of I don't know if it's uniquely American, but I suspect that it is.
Yeah, and I should say, you have a great YouTube channel, and so if you can't stay up late, there are great ways of watching you.
Yeah, there are too many ways of watching me. I mean, I remember the days when I didn't have a VCR when I fell in love with David Letterman, and so I would have friends tape the show for me, friends who had a VCR, and then I'd go from kind of house to house depending upon who would tolerate it and who would go along with it and who had the best set of rabbit ears on their TV. And I'd watch the show when I couldn't stay up late enough to watch it. Most nights I watched it live, but it's so easy now, and it's just one of those things I know we'll be telling our grandkids, like, oh, you have no idea, it's our version of walking without shoes through the snow to school.
How old were you when you were allowed to stay up till 11:30 and watch the Tonight Show?
I don't know that I ever asked permission. My parents, most of my life, we had a little 12-inch black and white television set. And sometime when I think I was in junior high school, my mom went to Macy's and bought a full-size color TV set, and she expected my dad to be angry when he got home, but he wasn't. And I took the little TV set, right to my room, my office, but I thought of it as an office. But I put it on my desk, and I never saw my family again. That was it.
You're so relaxed on your show, but it sounds like you're very obsessive about putting it together. Rolling Stone, the cover story about you in Rolling Stone, described you as transcribing the other late night hosts' monologues to make sure there's no similarities between your monologue and theirs. Can you talk a little bit more about why you or your staff transcribes those monologues, what you do?
Yeah, it's not me personally. It's our staff. We have one poor guy who has to sit there and write all this stuff up every night. I just don't want to repeat jokes that have been on other shows. I don't want to be accused of stealing jokes from other shows, and I just kind of want to know what they're doing. I don't go through and read that stuff unless somebody says, hey, this looks a little bit similar to what Conan is doing, and then I'll look into it, or it's a joke that was on Saturday Night Live this week. But it's mostly because I think it's important to be original. I would hate the idea that people think we're stealing jokes. So I want to make sure that we don't, even if it's an accident.
You did a whole show in character as Jay Leno. What separates your monologue from his monologue, do you think?
They're not that much different. I mean, truth be told, we're talking about current subjects. We're talking about people in the news. We're talking about the big stories. I think that I try to imagine when I write a joke or when I look at a joke, one of the writers have written, I sometimes will imagine it in Jay's voice, and if I can, I'll generally throw it out.
That's interesting. Okay. So you were one of the people who paid tribute to David Letterman at the end of 2012 when he received a Kennedy Center honor. And it was a really beautiful and funny tribute that shows how much he means to you and how he's affected you as a comic and as a host. So I just want to play your tribute to him.
In February of 1983, when Late Night with David Letterman went on the air, I was 15 years old and lucky enough to have a little black and white TV set in my bedroom. Every night, after my parents went into their room to molest each other, I'd stay up late secretly watching Johnny Carson, and then I started staying up later to watch the guy who went on after him. And while I loved Johnny, I fell in love with Dave. When I turned 16, I blew out the candles on a Late Night with David Letterman cake that my mom made me. My first car had a late night vanity plate. I drew pictures of Dave on the covers of all my textbooks. I started a Late Night with David Letterman club in high school. To me, it wasn't just a TV show. It was the reason I would fail to make love to a live woman for many, many years. Every night, I wanted to be David Letterman. All my friends wanted to be David Letterman. Ironically, the only person who didn't want to be David Letterman is David Letterman. And that is a shame because you, Dave, are the funniest, the smartest, the weirdest, the coolest, and the best one ever, hands down. And the greatest thrill of my career came last month when Dave agreed to be a guest on my show. He could tell I was nervous, so right before the show, he came to my dressing room and just held me. But Dave, whether you like it or not, you are my hero, and you are a hero to most everyone in this room, with the possible exception of the people who came to see the ballerina. No one will ever measure up to you. It's impossible because we wouldn't know how to do this without you. You taught us, you inspired us, and most of all, you made us laugh really hard. Thank you, Dave.
It was a really beautiful tribute. That was Jimmy Kimmel paying tribute to David Letterman. What did you do in the David Letterman Club that you founded?
Well, he used to do a Friday night show every once in a while, like once every 3 months, and we would have, I'd have people over to the house. Paul Schaefer used to sing a song. It was this little stupid thing. He'd say, Bermuda, it's a cuckoo, nutty place. And so I decorated my house to look like Bermuda for one of these parties. I'd recreate props that I'd seen on the show. There was they did a bit about the summer barbecue or something. They had a sign that said, if the grill's not clean enough for you, go home. And so I made a sign that said that above the grill. I'd make buttons with Dave's face on them, and then everyone would wear them. Looking back on it, I know it's ridiculous, but it made perfect sense at the time.
So
it really did.
At the time, did you think this is what I want to do when I grow up? I want to have a late night show?
No, I know it's a much better story that way, but that never crossed my mind. It really didn't. It was, I never thought there would be another late night show. I never thought that, it never occurred to me that Johnny Carson and David Letterman would ever go off the air. I mean, it never occurred to me, even though I knew the names of every writer on late night, it never occurred to me that you could get a job as a writer on late night. I thought those are the writers on the show, and that's how it goes. And had anyone ever stopped me and said, maybe you should submit, and maybe you could write something, and maybe they'll hire, that's probably the path I would have taken, but it never occurred to me.
So
I was not a bright kid.
So while you were, the founding president of the David Letterman Club, and you had your David Letterman license plate, what were you thinking your future was going to be?
I wanted to be an artist. That was my goal. I'm good at drawing, and in school that's kind of what I was known for, and it just seemed to be what I would do. Everyone in my family thought that is what I would do, and I thought that was what I would do, but I read a Playboy magazine article. Dave was interviewed, and in that article he said he started in radio, and I loved Howard Stern, and I thought, well, that seems like it might be fun. And I was working at a clothing store in Las Vegas, and a couple days later, one of the guys that worked there said, hey, I work at the college radio station at KUNV in Las Vegas, and you'd be funny on the radio. You want to do something? And I said, yeah, I'd love to do something. And I went in, had a meeting with the program director, and they had a plan for me when I got there. He said, I want you to do a half-hour show on Sunday nights and make fun of local celebrities. And I thought, oh, that's great. And the first time I did it, I'm sure it was terrible. I don't have the tapes, unfortunately, but I loved it, and my whole family was listening. When I got home, that experience, which I'm sure you've had, when you realize people are listening to you, is magical, and I was hooked in it. I mean, I loved being in a radio station. I loved radio. I just could not get enough of it. I mean, I worked for years for free. I just loved every bit of it, and just the idea of broadcasting was really excited me.
Isn't that station a public station?
It is, yeah.
So you started...
Mostly jazz.
So Jimmy Kimmel started in public radio.
That's right.
Wow, that's great.
And graduated to the public toilet.
So you had several different personas on the air, right, over the years? You did sports, and you did, like, morning zoo stuff, maybe?
Yeah, I worked at the Q Morning Zoo in 2 different markets, KRQ in Tucson and Q105, and this is how creative people in radio are. If there's a Q in it, it rhymes with zoo, and that's what we're going to call the show. But I worked at a couple of morning zoos. I did characters on the air.
Oh, what characters did you do?
I did Mike Tyson a lot. I do Snoop Dogg when Snoop eventually became a force. Mostly African-American characters, which I'm sure I'd be pilloried for doing now, but Karl Malone is a basketball player whom I'd imitate. I did a tough, like, kind of sports guy character, like a Brooklyn guy named Vinny the Sports Guy, my first radio job, paying radio job in Seattle, and I did that in addition to being the sidekick, and it was fun because people didn't know we were the same guy, even though our voices were almost identical. People didn't understand, so every time we go out and do a live appearance, people go, "Where's Vinny? Where's Vinny?" I said, "Oh, you know, he couldn't." I love that too, because it's like you're pulling a little prank on everybody every morning.
My guest is Jimmy Kimmel. His late-night ABC show, Jimmy Kimmel Live, moved to an earlier time slot this month, 11:35. More after a break. This is Fresh Air.
And this is 89.3 KPCC. I'm Tammy Trujillo. The LA Art Show is now open at the LA Convention Center. Among the exhibits on display is called Letters from Los Angeles. Curator Jack Rutberg explains that while people may recognize other cities through their architecture or moments,
we, Los Angeles, Southern California, is identified internationally by typography. And what I mean by that is 20th Century Fox, MGM, the Hollywood sign.
Letters from Los Angeles showcases works that LA artists infused with text and numerals, and you can see some photos of some of the featured works at the LA Art Show. Have a preview before you go down there on our website at kpcc.org. Click on Arts. It's 7:20.
KPCC supporters include
Venue Fresh Markets, offering a new cashless vending machine alternative with fresh salads, sandwiches, fruit, and more. Information on getting a Venue Fresh Market for your business at 800-834-0220.
If you're just joining us, my guest is Jimmy Kimmel, and Jimmy Kimmel Live has moved to its new time, which is 11:30 on ABC. So you start on radio and eventually end up on late night. So let's get to your late night show, the one that was at 12:30 and is now at 11:30, Jimmy Kimmel Live.
It was actually at midnight and now.
A midnight, right, after Nightline.
Right.
So you get a show and you have to figure out how are you going to be different from the other guys. When you had to first figure out who are you as a late night host, like how did you figure out who you were going to be and what your trademarks were going to be?
It took a long time. One thing I did right is I knew that you had to have a desk and you had to have a couch and you had to have a band, and that I was smart enough to know. But that's where that intelligence ended. I honestly, the rest of it, I didn't know how to do it. Almost no one on our staff knew how to do it, and I just kind of figured it out just to stay alive. I mean, really, every night, every day, it was like trying not to drown. Just trying to get a show on the air, trying to get guests to sit in the chair that night. Sometimes getting good guests, sometimes getting terrible guests, sometimes feeling very bad about myself after the show and feeling like it was a mess, and occasionally feeling like, well, that went okay, maybe I could do this. I even went through a period where I secretly hoped ABC would cancel the show because I had a lot of people relying on me, and I still do, people at work on the show, and I couldn't really quit. Not that I would have, but the thought was always in my head that it would sure be great if somebody would put an end to my misery here.
What was the
Let me go
misery
on to
coming
something.
from? It was too hard or too much
It was
pressure?
relentless. It was relentless. And I've been acclimated to that, doing morning radio 5.5 hours a day, every morning. But just the amount to which I had to rely on others was difficult for me. Because when you do a talk show, you do have to rely on guests. You have to rely on people agreeing to be a part of it. And you have to ask them to go along with things. You have to ask them to participate. Whereas in radio, you can do the show on your own endlessly and indefinitely. If you have somebody, that's great, but you don't need to have somebody. So that was hard for me, and it was hard to convince people to be on the show, partly I think because there was some fear that I was some kind of a monster that they imagined based on The Man Show, which is a show I did on Comedy Central, and people didn't understand that that show was it was kind of a character, you know, it was a specific shows aimed at a specific audience, and it was tongue-in-cheek. It wasn't, you know, we aren't misogynists, Adam and I. Well, maybe Adam is, I don't know, but that needs to be figured out. But we were just joking, and it was hard to. It took a long time to get people to understand that.
So it must be hard to be really stressed out because of the pressures of a new show, and then come on at midnight as the relaxed midnight guy, like your day's over, I'm gonna like tell you some jokes, entertain you. Was it hard to be the relaxed, funny person you wanted to be after day of stress?
Weirdly, no, because the thing about doing the show is once the show starts, the work is done. So you can relax in a way. You can stop and enjoy it. If I don't know if that's the right word to use, but you can do that because everything's done. And sometimes I walk downstairs and I think, we have some really funny stuff tonight, and I'm looking forward to showing it to the audience. Some nights I walk downstairs and go, all right, it's all on you, to make this funny, and you might not. And some nights I walk out and the audience is great and they give me laughs where I don't deserve them, and some nights it goes the other way where you feel like something was funny and you didn't get much response from people, and that's the nature of performing in front of a live audience, and there's nothing you can do about it. But for me, doing the show is kind of the best part of the day.
More or less right from the beginning of your show, you've had family involved with it. Your uncle, your cousin, your old friend from, I think, high school is the leader of the band on your show.
Yeah, it's my best friend since I was 9 years old. He lived across the street from me, and his dad is in the band too. But my Aunt Chippy is on the show. My cousin Sal is a regular and a writer on the show. My brother's a director on the show. My fiance is the co-head writer on the show. My cousin Mickey works in the talent department, and I've got a few other relatives, not quite as close to those, sprinkled throughout the show too.
It's often exactly the opposite for people. They get to a certain level of fame, and it's not that they cut off their family, but they're in a different world than their family. But
Those are smart people. Those.
But you've brought so much of your family into your world, and some of them are behind the scenes, some of them are in front of the camera. How did it end up that way? Why did you want to do that?
Well, first I think I had to do that. The first person that I brought on the air was my Uncle Frank. My Uncle Frank was a cop in New York for 20 years. He worked as a security guard in Vegas for various celebrities like Frank Sinatra and everyone Italian who come into Vegas. My Uncle Frank was their security guard at Caesars, and he was a funny character, and I got a kick out of him. And every once in a while I have him on the radio when I was on the radio, and he was always funny, and I knew that I needed someone to talk to on the air. I knew that I needed something besides me and somebody to send to things, and instantly he fit that perfectly. I had to convince him. In fact, he was living in New York, and the only reason that he moved out to take the job on the show was he found he was worried about transferring his checking account. He had a specific bank at which he had a checking account, and he found out there was one branch of the bank in LA, so he rented an apartment right near that bank, and that's what made it okay to come out.
My guest Jimmy Kimmel will be back in the second half of the show. His show, Jimmy Kimmel Live, just got a new time slot at 11:35 p.m. Here's one of his recent bits that went viral. He's said that Twitter has become our #1 way to insult celebrities, so he asked several recent guests to read the meanest tweets about them. Here's a few examples.
Selena Gomez is on the radio right now. Is there a volume lower than mute? Sorry.
I saw Larry King at dinner, but it might have been just a run-of-the-mill Douglas.
Dr. Phil, why don't you shut the up, bald-headed, big-mouthed hillbilly?
Simon Cowell, you, my friend, are in.
My Asian orthodontist says Jessica Biel has horse teeth. No one else finds Hayden Panettiere intolerable. Is that a question?
I'm not being mean, but why does Anderson Cooper remind me of dinosaurs?
Aaron Snow Street, why so awkward and yelly? I'm not awkward and yelly.
Malcolm in the middle. More like mushy in the middle. Lose some weight, Heisenberg. Had a good chuckle over that one. I'm coming after you. TX Grizz.
The last person we heard from in that clip from Jimmy Kimmel Live was Bryan Cranston. I'm Terry Gross, and this is Fresh Air.
Celebrating Fresh Air's 25 years, the Neubauer Foundation salutes WHYY and listeners like you, committed to new ideas and civilized conversation. Support for NPR comes from NPR member stations and from Road Scholar, with educational travel adventures to 150 countries, including Cuba this winter, at roadscholar.org. From Angie's List, with local reviews of roofers, doctors, auto shops, and yard care. More at angieslist.com. And from Ancestry.com, an online resource for starting a family tree and getting clues to the past. Learn more at tryancestry.com. This is NPR.
KPCC supporters include the Los Angeles Chamber Orchestra with German conductor Helmut Rilling, presenting Mozart's Requiem Saturday, January 26th at the Alex Theater and Sunday, January 27th at Royce Hall. NACO joins the USC Thornton Chamber Singers with soloists Stacy Tappan, Callista Hoffman, Nicholas Vann, and Michael Dean for the classic work. The concert opens with Mozart's Symphony No. 39. Tickets at laco.org.
U.S. military's ban on women serving in combat is coming to a close. This is our answer next time on Air Talk. What do you think about the end of that ban and what the implications are in military culture? And we'll also dine out old school Los Angeles, talking about L.A.'s late-great restaurants and which ones you miss the most. It's Air Talk weekday mornings at 11 here on 89.3 KPCC.
This is Fresh Air. I'm Terry Gross, back with Jimmy Kimmel. This month, his late-night show, Jimmy Kimmel Live, moved to an earlier time, 11:35, opposite Leno and Letterman. Kimmel has always made family members a part of his regular cast of characters. When we left off, we were talking about how his Uncle Frank, a former security guard in Vegas and police officer in New York, became part of the show. When you told your Uncle Frank that you wanted him to be on camera, to be a character on your show, how did you tell him? What did you tell him?
He had no idea what I was talking about. He honestly had no idea what I was talking about. He was very confused. He thought he was going to be the head of security for the show, which is funny because in 20 years on the New York NYPD, he arrested only 6 people, and 1 was by accident. So these are his retirement years. But he really didn't know what to expect, and his daughters convinced him that it was a good idea. And he just stood by the door the first night. I think the first thing we ever shot with him was we sent him to Brooklyn with Mike Tyson to see Mike Tyson's pigeons on the rooftop. And it was an odd piece, and it was kind of sweet, and it was funny, and that's when I knew that it was going to work.
You had him basically play a security guard.
No, well, yeah, you're right. He wasn't really doing security. But he was wearing a security guard uniform.
Yeah.
He thought he was doing security, though, so...
Did he really?
Yeah, oh yeah. He, if something happened, he would try to stop it. I mean, there was a time where Andy Dick had to be dragged off the stage, and there was my Uncle Frank dragging Andy Dick off the stage.
So your Uncle Frank died in 2011, and you did a really beautiful tribute to him on the show. And I want to play an excerpt of that tribute. Here's Jimmy Kimmel.
So I'm going to try to do this without crying, but I'm probably going to fail. But just turn away or something, because it's embarrassing. It really is. As you may have heard, my Uncle Frank, who already has been a fixture on our show since our first night on the air in January of 2003, passed away over our vacation. He hated vacation, so he decided to ruin ours. He hated vacation because he loved to come to work. He would get here 10, 11, 12 hours before the show started. The show started at beginning at 9 p.m. He'd be here by 8 a.m. That's how he was. He was always early for everything. If he had a flight at 2, he'd get to the airport by 6. And the flight was in the morning, he'd go the night before and sleep over. He'd sleep over at the airport so he didn't miss a flight. And he wanted us to always get to the airport early too. If I had a flight, I'd have to lie to him and tell him the flight was at 8, because then he said, okay, so you leave at 1? I said, no, I'll leave at 3. Okay. So it's hard to believe that he is now the late Uncle Frank, because he was never, ever late for anything. He was 77 when he died 2 weeks ago today. He had a few different kinds of cancer. We don't know which one got him. One of them did. And his plan was to live to 103. He wanted to be the oldest living retired police officer in New York City. Not because he wanted to set a record and be in the paper. He just wanted to stick them for another 25 years of pension check.
It's Jimmy Kimmel paying tribute to his Uncle Frank in 2011 after his life. Was that the only time you've ever choked up like that on the show?
It's happened a couple of times, but I'm actually crying right now. It embarrasses me. I'm not sure why. I know it's a normal human reaction, but there are a few things more embarrassing to me than crying on television. But it was a sad night.
Oh yeah, I think it's beautiful that you can actually, show that you are moved on the air and how much the deep feelings you had for your uncle. What role did he play in your life as a child?
He was a character. This is how dinner would go. Now, my parents never really, they didn't have friends, and my aunt and uncle didn't have friends, and my grandparents didn't have friends. They were each other's friends, so pretty much every weekend, we'd go to their house and we'd have dinner, or they'd come to our house and have dinner with us. And my Uncle Frank, we'd have dinner at around 6:30, 7 o'clock. My Uncle Frank would clear all the plates off the table, and then he would announce that he had to go to bed. And so he'd go to his bedroom, he'd say goodnight to everyone, and then once an hour until about midnight, he'd come out of his bedroom in pajamas and go, "Chippy, did you pay the water bill?" And she'd go, "Yeah, Frank." So he really wasn't going to bed. He would just try and get away from everyone. And when he cleared the plate, it wasn't because he wanted the house to be neat. He just wanted us to all go home. He really wanted, wherever he was ready to leave, and wherever he was headed, he was ready to go there. And I think it was anxiety more than anything, but it tickled us. And we, of course, we goofed on him all the time. And we'd ask him over and over again what time he's leaving for the airport. The story at the airport, I mean, there were many times where he slept over at the airport. It's crazy, but that's just how he was. He's a very odd guy, but always very nice and always very funny and just a good, solid guy.
So was he ever offended by what you had him do on the show, or seeing how he looked when he was on the show? Did you ever feel like he was the butt of the joke, like you were making fun of him?
Oh no, never. He loved to be on the show, and I think to a certain extent he played dumb because he knew people enjoy that. He learned that he'd get laughs from that kind of a thing. But he loved every minute of being on the show. In fact, one of the things that scared me was, he's an old man, and I loved having him on the show. Well, what happens when you get into your 80s and potentially 90s? Like how do you handle that if he's physically unable to be on the show? In a way, the way he went out was probably the way that he would have wanted to go out, where he was on the show until the end.
So I read that there was a period when you were young when you would actually videotape family fights, and I was thinking, what a weird thing to do, and how weird it was that your family allowed you to even do that. So
even weirder, I didn't have a video camera. I'd make cassette tapes of the family.
It was like audio tapes?
Yeah, audio tapes, and not just fights, everything. I just tape a whole dinner, and then my cousin Sal, we'd grab the tape, and then we'd memorize it. We'd listen back to it over and over again. I remember a particular passage as my Uncle Frank was trying to get ketchup out of the ketchup bottle, and he's shaking it, and he would give up on things almost immediately. So he's shaking the ketchup, and he goes to his wife, my Aunt Chippy, "Chip, how do you pour this?" He says, "Frank, you gotta shake it." He shakes it. "Shake it, Frank. Frank, you gotta open, the cap is on, Frank. You gotta open the bottle before it'll goddamn pour out." And then she goes on a rant. "He's so stupid, it's pathetic. He'll never invent the aeroplane. He'll never invent the light bulb. He's lucky if he knows how to turn one on." He'll never invent the aeroplane.
So you and your cousin Sal would record this and then memorize the lines and do it as a routine for each other?
Not only that, we had a book of quotes from my Aunt Chippy that she never said. So we'd make things up that we imagined her saying. She's very creative, especially when she gets mad. She's very creative. Her analogies are ridiculous, but also very imaginative. So we'd write, in fact, I still have it. It's like a binder, 3-ring binder, and we'd write things down that we think Aunt Chippy might have said.
So Sal works on your show. I mean, he does writing. He appears in sketches. So have you and he thought up things for the family to do on the show?
Oh yes, all the time. We're always coming up with things, especially when I have a family-related prank or some kind of mission to send them on. I always consult with Sal because he knows which buttons to push.
So give us an example of one of the things you cooked up with Sal.
Well, we decided, I was driving with my Aunt Chippy, and she was complaining about people that come to this country and don't learn to speak English, and it was ridiculous. "My grandparents came from Italy, and they learned how to speak English." It just goes on this long xenophobic rant, and Sal and I looked at each other, and that we realized that this was a weakness, and this was something that we could, a vulnerability we could expose. So I put that in my memory bank, and something I've always wanted to do is paint somebody's house while they were away at work. So when my Aunt Chippy was out at work, we had a bunch of actors pretending to be painters, also pretending that they don't speak any English, paint her house orange and green. She comes home from work, and her house is bright orange and green, and she's yelling at the workers, demanding to know what's going on, and none of them speak English, which makes her madder and madder. And then there's a guy on a roof who hands her a beer, and she goes crazy and throws it at him. They're painting the trees in her yard. It was probably my finest hour.
And was this a hidden camera, or did she know she was being
Yeah, it was a hidden camera.
And she was okay for you putting this on the air?
Yeah, she was okay, because at the end of, after the prank was over, we repainted her. Her house hadn't been painted in 35 years, so we repainted her house to its original condition. But she was pretty mad for an hour or so.
I think it's so interesting that you've been able to take things about your family that might horrify people about their own family. It's so awful when someone who you know well or someone in your family says something like racist or xenophobic. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
it's like, please don't. And you managed to, like, make a funny comment on xenophobia with your own family. like,
Well, I think that's the way to go. I think that's the way they did it on All in the Family. I think that's. I learned something from listening to the Howard Stern show because he used to have this Klan member would call in, and I remember thinking, wow, why would you give airtime to a Klan member, and why would Robin Quivers, his sidekick, just sit there and laugh and tolerate what he said? And I realized later, I figured it out. Like, oh yeah, they're showing us that this man is an imbecile, that he's ignorant, and to do what most people do, which is kind of shout him down and take this moral stance and yell at him, is not nearly as effective as giving him enough rope to hang himself, which might be a terrible analogy to make, but a fitting one, I think. And I think with my Aunt Chippy, people get old and this happens. I'm from a very liberal family, very tolerant family, but there are little things that that I don't know. She's from New York. She's from Brooklyn. She's Italian. She's old and she's cantankerous. And these are the sorts of things that bother her for some reason.
My guest is Jimmy Kimmel. His late-night ABC show, Jimmy Kimmel Live, moved to an earlier time slot this month, and now he starts opposite Leno and Letterman. More after a break. This is Fresh Air.
And this is 89.3 KPCC. I'm Tammy Trujillo. In sports tonight, unfortunately, another loss for the Lakers. Memphis wins at 106-93. The family of late football star Junior Seau is suing the NFL. His survivors accuse the league of deliberately concealing the harm that players face from traumatic brain injuries. Last month, researchers posthumously diagnosed Seau with a degenerative brain disease, a result of multiple blows to the head. His family claims that is what led the 43-year-old to commit suicide last May. Jody Armour at USC's law school says Seau's family could have a very strong case.
If indeed they're able to establish that the league has been aware of these risks and has deliberately ignored and concealed these risks and has done it all to maximize its profit, then they will have a strong claim indeed, I think, that they get it in front of many juries.
David Orlichter teaches law at Indiana University. He says the player's family could have trouble proving the NFL acted irresponsibly.
He played a lot of football before he got to the NFL. And one of the big questions is, to the extent he suffered damage, how much of it occurred before he even got to the NFL? There's going to be that question. It gets very tricky.
Both men spoke with KPCC's Larry Mantle. Junior Seau was a standout linebacker at USC and with the San Diego Chargers, the Miami Dolphins, and the New England Patriots. It's 7:44.
California Capital News on KPCC is supported by the ScholarShare College Savings Plan. ScholarShare lets Californians save for college. More on the plan at scholarshare.com. TIAA-CREF Tuition Financing Incorporated Plan Manager.
If you're just joining us, my guest is Jimmy Kimmel, and his show, Jimmy Kimmel Live, has moved to its new time spot, which is 11:30 on ABC. You do a lot of pranking on your show, and we talked a little earlier about that you started your career on radio. Did you do pranks